So, good morning everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. I would like to offer welcome to colleagues who are in the room, many of whom are from Scotland. I know we have colleagues from further afield in the UK and a huge number of colleagues likely online. So I'd like to offer our welcome on behalf of the Scottish Government to this Maternity and Midwifery Festival. And I'm sure that no matter where you come from in the UK, you'll be aware that we've been celebrating 70 years of the NHS. How many of you were aware of that? Yeah, okay. So there is absolutely no doubt that maternity services and neonatal services in Scotland have changed just a little bit since 1948, as you can see in the slides there. And what I don't want is any of you asking which one of those in the black and white photo is me, okay? But I'm sure there's quite a few colleagues from Glasgow that I've met today, and I'm sure a lot of us can resonate with that bottom left-hand photograph. I remember many a night shift in the nursery with 30 screaming babies. And isn't it wonderful how sometimes we look back and think those were great days? I just leave that with you, and you're going to hear a bit more from Mary about maybe why that might not be the case. So Scotland as a country has been on a transformational journey and is still on that journey to make sure that our health and social care services are fit for the future needs of our population. And the best start heralds a fundamental shift in the way that we will provide maternity and neonatal care in Scotland that's in line with that wider direction of travel. And that direction of travel means that we're looking to shift more care into communities, closer to home. That we're looking to promote self-management, people taking accountability for their own health. That we're looking to normalise care as much as possible. That we're looking to reduce unnecessary intervention and unwarranted variation. And that will all see huge, dramatic, further improvements for women and families in Scotland. And it will help set the direction for a healthy pathway in life, which is really, really important. And I want to begin just by focusing on that and why, as a country in Scotland, we believe it's so important to invest in the early years. And I'm sure that you all know that we know very well about the outcomes associated with high quality medical care for infants. But what we haven't always known is the impact of those early years on long-term health and well-being right through into adulthood. That from as early as when a baby is developing in its mother's womb, the decisions and the actions taken at that time can actually fundamentally change the future. And let me just give you an example of what we mean by that. So we know that when a baby is developing in utero, then it's influenced by the biochemical signals it receives through the mother's blood. And so, for example, if we have a mum living in adverse circumstances, then she's likely to produce high levels of stress hormones. And that in turn can lead her baby to overproduce its own stress hormones. And that affects brain development, and it can predispose that infant to physical and mental ill health right through life. And we know that adults who've got an overdeveloped stress response have got an increased risk of developing cardiac disease, stroke, and other common illnesses. And we know that young adults who haven't quite learned an appropriate psychological mechanism for dealing with stress are more likely to have had their schooling disrupted and to have criminal convictions. So we can see how that long-term path can actually be predetermined in those early weeks and months of pregnancy. And that's where our maternity and neonatal services come in. As the slide shows there is absolutely no doubt, and we have the evidence, that investing in the early years will see a significant return on that investment in terms of use of health and social care right through life. So, if we as a country in Scotland are to realise our ambitions to improve the nation's health and to reduce health inequalities, then we've got to move further into a preventative space. And we need to invest in interventions that can actually impact positively on physical and mental health and can build capacity in individuals. And that's exactly where Best Start comes in. and where all of you who are working in our service can really have an impact. So I want to focus just on two key themes running through Best Start that actually will enable that preventative approach that we need to see. And the first is introducing a continuity of carer model for midwifery. And during the review, we heard a clear and consistent message from women about their desire to form relationships with the midwives who look after them. Midwives also talked about wanting to provide continuity of care, but the system and the way it's set up actually prevents people from doing that. And we have a compelling evidence base that tells us about the positive impact that continuity models can have on outcomes. And let me give you just some examples of that. So the recent Cochrane review illustrates that women who've experienced these models are significantly more likely to be satisfied with their care. They're significantly more likely to have a vaginal birth, to have fewer interventions during labour, and to go on and successfully breastfeed their baby. And they're significantly less likely to have a preterm birth, or in fact to lose their baby, whether it be through stillbirth or other means. And there are benefits for midwives as well, in terms of increased autonomy and job satisfaction. So it's very clear that we have an evidence base for this change. But it's not all about midwives. So there are many women who require input from the wider maternity team, and it's equally important that they have continuity from their obstetrician and from others who are involved in their care. But just stop for a minute and think if we in Scotland achieved those improvements outlined in that slide. What a massive impact that would have for mothers, families, and indeed for staff up and down the length and breadth of this country. So there's absolutely no question that continuity of carer is the right thing to do. So let's hear from some real people about why that matters to them.
Caring for women is a very special job.
I felt comfortable as soon as I seen her, as I knew that I didn't have anything to be worried about.
I think for women to have the choice can only be a positive thing.
I have never been so autonomous in my practice.
Having that familiar face with you, you just feel that a little bit safer and knowing that they're there for you all the time.
Basically for the women, continuity of carer is seeing the same midwife as much as possible throughout their pregnancy journey. So from booking in, newly pregnant, throughout their antenatal care, hopefully having the same midwife when they actually come in to have their baby, and then having the same midwife for postnatal care. The idea is you get to know the midwife and the midwife gets to know you.
After finishing my training and qualifying, I went to Australia and worked with independent midwives where they done continuity of care both antenatal, intrapartum and postnatally, and following that experience that was my real turning point in realising that continuity of care was the way I wanted to go, and luckily the position came up here in Angus, so that was a real perfect fit for me.
My experience was really good when I was pregnant because it was my first time and I was quite nervous about it, but I had the same midwife all the way through and we grew quite a good bond with each other. I was very set on what I wanted through my pregnancy and what I wanted for my birth and stuff, and yeah, she was really good at supporting that.
We were doing the right things and having the right conversations and building the right kind of relationship antenatally, and then to be able to follow that on at the time that's most important for a woman, it was great for me to know that she felt safe and supported and cared for with someone that she knew.
The first two pregnancies were very different in respect of I didn't know the midwives. I was constantly having to repeat myself on every appointment, which was quite a burden, to be fair, if there's a long history of things to discuss with them. But I had the same midwife within the third pregnancy throughout from start to finish. My kids developed a friendship with my midwife also, and my baby, I feel that she still recognises her voice with being in my stomach. Every time she hears her, like she's smiling, she squeals at her, it's like she actually knows who she is.
I'm not a great one for change, and it's probably because I've been a midwife for a few years, and the thought of changing how I worked was terrifying. I thought it would involve an awful lot of on-call. I thought it would involve much more difficult working conditions, and yeah, I really worried about it. The reality is it has been really good. I think the research shows that continuity is much better for women in terms of pregnancy outcome.
I personally feel moving towards a continuity model can only be a positive thing. Again, it's quite nerve-wracking thinking, oh, what's this going to mean for us in our jobs, but when you think about the women, it will hopefully reduce their anxiety and promote more normality within childbirth.
Benefits for women will be that they'll know their midwife really well. That's another benefit for the midwife themselves, because they won't need to go through things like a handover every time they see their patients, because they'll know everything about them from the offset, so it won't be such a impersonal thing that's going on. For someone who's at the beginning of their training, I'm really excited to be part of the new changes and everything that's happening for midwifery in Scotland. I think it's going to be great, yeah.
So as usual, the babies do steal the show, don't they? Jane and I, when we're going about doing the presentation, often think we should just let them do the talking actually, and we should just sit down. So following on from that, if we move on to another theme which will help that preventative approach that we need, then we want to think about keeping mothers, babies and families together as much as possible. And the improvements and outcomes for our most sick and vulnerable neonates is one of the great success stories of the past 2 decades. And again, during the review, we heard from families with babies in neonatal care about what made them anxious. They want to be more involved in the care of their baby. They want to be with their baby as much as they can, and they actually feel really anxious when they're separated. And staff also told us that we need to make it easier to try and keep families together. So we know that we could actually minimise separation for families if we just did things differently in the service. So for example, by introducing a 7-day community outreach service so that families and babies can get home to that normal environment as soon as possible. By introducing a consistent approach to transitional care across the country, so that for babies who need just a little bit extra support, their family can be with them as they prepare to go home. And for those small number of babies that need the most intensive support, that we redesign our services in line with the best available evidence in terms of outcomes, and that we also really embed truly family-centred care, which means parents being full decision makers, full partners in their care, and doing as much of the care as physically possible. So again, people might be sitting thinking, oh, how can we do that? We're all far too busy. Well, let's hear about where that's happening already.
Transitional care is important because it keeps families together.
It's where parents can actually provide that care as long as they have been educated, supported.
I could help with nappy changes and she could catch up with a wee bit of sleep.
I didn't have fears for going home because they had made me completely ready for going home.
Being able to pick her up, hold her and bond like as a mum should be able to do.
But the core principle is you want to keep mothers and babies and fathers together as much as possible.
I got a group B strep and I was very ill, and Grace was very ill as well.
Daniela really kind of needed me, and she felt that I could support her a lot, and the provision of a room in the hospital where I could stay as a dad was fantastic.
We're here because, in the transitional unit, because Maisie's been quite sick. The last phase she's been born, she had an infection. She's been in here for 5 days now. The staff have been absolutely brilliant. They're coming in, checking on me, checking on her, obviously, like we went through all the last week just to make sure that she's well and I'm well. Having my sister be able to stay well, if it wasn't for her, then I wouldn't have managed. Connie's been a big part of this week.
They've allowed me to stay, so I'm here 24 hours a day. Everything's here for you, they make sure that you're okay. And
she's obviously been changing her, bathing her. It's taken a bit of pressure off me and the nurses because she's able to help. Well, my whole family's been allowed to come up to visit, and it's made a big difference because they've been able to come up and bond with Maisie if she's been born, and my son's been able to come up, sit in the bed and play with Sissa, give her kisses and bond, because I can't get home to him. He's able to come to me, so we're allowed to, now we can spend good quality time as a family.
In transitional care, they're staying with their baby 24/7, so they're doing everything for their baby, but we are just outside the door, so if they're struggling in any way, they can come to us and ask our advice.
Co-located, they're together, we're avoiding separation, but these babies have additional care needs.
For instance, if the babies require tube feeding, then we would make sure the parents are trained to administer the tube feeds appropriately and correctly. If they maybe have a stoma or nasal stents or something, which we've had babies with, where parents need to have that time to become familiar with that kind of care. So the parents actually take on that, and between both of them, they're actually providing all of the care for the baby. But we are still here to be in there to support, to help and to guide them.
We know that the more time the families spend with their preterm baby, their baby that's requiring medical input, the better the bonding, the better the neurodevelopmental outcome. You're more likely to be able to keep breastfeeding going. Separation is bad for mothers and babies, or should be avoided if at all possible.
The last few days we were left a wee bit more ourselves. And we could get used to caring for the baby ourselves before we had to go home with the baby, so that was good.
Well, when I first moved to transitional care, I didn't have very much neonatal experience, so I've learned so much in the 9 years I've worked in transitional care from every different part of the multidisciplinary team. So every day I'm learning, and it was lovely to be able to keep, parents together with their babies.
I think they're supported to leave the hospital because they've had that period of time in transitional care where they have been the main carers, and gradually through their stay in transitional care the staff back off a bit more and allow the parents to take on more of the care, so they know exactly what they're doing, they know what appointments they need, they know what needs to be done at home, and our community liaison service, if it's required, would be in while they're in transitional care and special care, because they're based in the unit with us. They'll be in meeting the families and actually sorting out visits and what would need to be done at home, so that they know who's coming out to see them, when they're coming out, and all these different things are all in place before they get home. If the parents can do it in here for a few days and they're totally competent, there's no reason why they can't do it in their own home.
So that's just 2 themes that are running through Best Start. There are 76 recommendations, and I'm not going to go over all of them, so you'll be glad to hear. So last year we've identified 5 early adopter boards that are leading the way across Scotland in terms of introducing a whole package of recommendations around about continuity of care and local delivery of care, and that's the boards that are coloured yellow there. And 1 year on, there's real progress being made. By the end of this year, all of these early adopter boards will have teams providing continuity of care for women. And these early teams will be really, really important in us understanding the learning about some of the stuff that really matters to midwives. For example, rosters, ways of working, and some of the things that you heard about that people are scared of. And once we've done that learning, then that will enable the boards to roll out continuity at scale across the board area. And one of the boards already is suggesting that they will be rolling out across their entire board as early as March next year. That's phenomenal. And there are other tangible changes. NHS Lanarkshire and Forth Valley have just recently introduced new alongside midwifery units. Some of them are seeing 30% of their births already go through those units in just a couple of months. That's a fantastic start. NHS Highland is doing some brilliant work with technology to reshape antenatal care for women. So the midwife and the woman are sitting in Highland and the obstetrician's in Glasgow. So imagine the time, the money that that's saving for that woman, that family, and indeed for the staff. That's brilliant stuff. Some of the early adopters have already introduced transitional care and are seeing that impact on reduced admissions to the neonatal unit. And all of the learning from the early adopters will be really critical as the other boards come on stream, and all boards in Scotland will be starting to plan for implementation of continuity local delivery of care from January. So things should look really different in 12 months' time. But it's really important to say it's not all about the early adopter boards. We have 14 NHS boards in Scotland, and every one of them is doing significant work right now, today, to implement the 76 recommendations in Best Start. And I want to thank everybody for that. And just a flavour of some of the work that's going on to support that. We have national pathways for maternity care that people might be familiar with. They're currently being refreshed to look at how we have a personalised approach to care, because that's what women and staff said they wanted. NES, NHS Education for Scotland, have been working with boards to develop a suite of updating materials so that we can prepare midwives to go and work in a continuity of carer model, because they might not have done the full care pathway for a long time. So we need to support them to do that. There's work going on to understand what are the different skills that we need in relation to practicing in remote and rural areas. Scotland has seriously remote and rural areas, and we need to support staff to work in that way and in a different context. And the redesign of our neonatal services is well underway. And we recently introduced a neonatal expenses fund, which is a consistent approach to reimbursing the out-of-pocket expenses that families experience when their baby's in neonatal care. And you can imagine that's just one less thing for them to worry about at what is a really stressful time. So that was just a very quick tour of some of the work that's going on just now. There is absolutely no doubt that Best Start is an aspirational and ambitious policy, no question. But that's exactly what it needs to be if we are to realise the improvements that women, families and staff in Scotland said they wanted to see. Our NHS in Scotland is world class. You'll hear ministers and others say that all the time, and it's true. We have a world class, safe and modern NHS in Scotland. And our maternity and neonatal staff make a real difference to people's lives every single day. But it's really, really important to say that this is a massive transformational change, and we're in the midst of that journey. And it's right to acknowledge that change is difficult. It's not going to be easy all the time. We're on a journey, and the road will be bumpy along the way, and that's natural. But what people, I would urge in Scotland particularly, to keep in mind is right back to the early years, right back to the impact that actually maternity and neonatal services can make in terms of setting those really important foundations for strong family relationships and for transforming future public health in Scotland. And the tangible difference that will mean that you all who work here will make is for the family who can stay together and take their baby home earlier than they might have done last year. For the woman who's got the relationship with the same midwife across her entire pregnancy journey. And for the baby, where we can maximise the opportunity for them to have the bonding, the attachment and the parenting they need to actually set them on a healthy life pathway. That's the difference that Best Start can make, and that the maternity and neonatal staff in Scotland can actually do. And I would ask you to come with us on that journey. Thank you.